Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Hello, guys, and welcome back to What We See, the podcast for all your salty stories and watery tales. I'm your host, Ariel, the little mermaid, signing in from the gorgeous, chilly waters of the Emerald Sea here in the Pacific Northwest. Today, I'm joined by formerly homeless photographer, aka Matthew Sullivan. This dude is an incredible photographer and the co host of the Underwater Photography Show on YouTube. Matt's portfolio includes some of the most incredible reptile and amphibian photos, including the Hellbender salamander and my personal favorite, juvenile southern hog-nosed snakes. If you haven't seen them, you're not a snake fan, trust me. They're so cute. I want a hog-nosed snake so bad. And you're just like stoking this inner, like, I want a hog-nosed snake. They're so cute. I want to boop their cute little faces. You're not helping me here. And also, Matt is just such a kind, helpful person all around. So happy to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. And to make matters worse for you, this morning I did find a southern hognose on the way back to Florida. And it was not a baby, it was a big adult, but they're still just as cute and even fatter and chunkier.
So they have chunky babies, but they're even more chunky and baby when they're adults?
Oh, yeah, the adults look like sausages in the road. They're super fat.
So cute. I'm gonna die. I'm literally gonna pass out and die right now. I love them so much.
Yeah, the hogs in general are probably my favorite. They're my favorite U.S. snakes for sure.
Ooh, that's so awesome. Wait, favorite snakes or photography subject?
Vipers are definitely better photography subjects, but hognoses they're cute, they're super variable, and they have personality. They have different personalities, and they're generally harder to find than a lot of viper species. So I think that's part of the appeal as well.
That's incredible. Before we continue, though, we start the show off typically with our watery tales of the world. So, a fun news article that is ocean critter related and give a report of local dive conditions. So, let's start with
The men tell no tales.
Okay, you may have heard this, but in Costa Rica, there is a small semi-aquatic lizard called a diving anole. Or anole? 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 I'm going to go with anole. Now, why is it called that, you may ask? Diving anole. Because this lizard is an actual scuba diver. It uses a bubble of air on the top of its head as a reservoir of oxygen, and it can dive underwater to avoid predators. Literally, it's a scuba diving lizard.
I have not actually heard of that, so that's pretty cool. And now I will have a new lizard I need to add to my must-see list. And it'd be fascinating to figure out if there's a way to actually photograph that underwater naturally. Although I imagine finding one doing that and then having all your gear and then managing to get the picture would be pretty difficult without staging it, I'd imagine.
It would be, but I've seen pictures of them on land and they legit have bubbles like on they have like a flat nose and the bubble goes on top of that and it actually will expand.
Oh, that's cool.
I know, and the bubble will expand and then contract. And scientists have been studying them for years, right? Apparently, the bigger the bubble, the longer they can stay underwater. And they did this test where they actually would try and block the bubbles a little bit. So on average, they can dive for like 3.5 minutes and stay down. But if they block the bubble, it's a little bit less. And naturally, if the bubble expands, they can dive for longer, which is absolutely incredible.
This reminds me of, which is incredible, but in a much more horrific way, is there's spiders that will do that. They'll trap air on the hairs all over their body and then can just go for a walk underwater. And I'm not a spider guy. I'll deal with sharks, I'll deal with snakes, I'll deal with crocodilians. I can't handle spiders. And when I learned that they can just be underwater, that still kind of freaks me out a little bit.
I don't know if you can see me right now, but I'm literally twitching in my seat. Good. No, 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 no. All the good vibes from the cute hog-nosed chunky snakes are gone. Oh, I hate spiders. And I get crap for this. I get crap for this because locally in Seattle, we have sea spiders. We have the giant ones that like daddy long legs, and we have smaller ones that you see in like Port Harding on soft corals. Those are different.
Yeah.
I swear to God, sea spiders are different. Okay. I don't know what in my mind why it's different, but it is. Okay. I don't know about you, but for me, it is.
I agree with you because and it's something just about Because even things like arrow crabs or something like that, they're very spider-like, but for whatever reason they don't give off the same sort of vibe as an actual spider. And I remember the first time I saw one of those spiders, it literally just, it was on a rock, and they're big. I'm from New Jersey, and we have spiders. They're called fishing spiders, and they get like 6 inches across. And it was sitting on a rock, and I was eyeballing it because I think they're cool, even though they creep me out. It was sitting on a rock, and all of a sudden it just walked down into the water, and it turned silver because it trapped all the air around its hairs, and then just started going for a walk across the bottom of this creek. And it was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. And like I said, it still creeps me out, the fact that there's spiders that can do that. And I know they're not the only one. I think there's species kind of everywhere that can do it. But it's one of my least favorite animal facts, is that spiders can do that.
You're not safe on land or under the water.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so the spider from your story, I'm going to name him Cotton Eye Joe, because I have 2 questions. Where did he come from? And where did he go?
Yeah, exactly.
Although it's fascinating you bring that up, because I was actually going to talk about how the diving animal is actually the only critter with a backbone who can like dive, basically. But yes, it has been observed in spiders and insects. Well observed. I say we move on before I squirm out of my seat and fall over and hurt myself. So let's move on to let's move on to local conditions, please.
Can you see?
Wonderful news. We are now into fall. This is, in my opinion, the best season for diving here in Seattle and Pacific Northwest. So from here to like Port Hardy in Canada, these are the best conditions. The water is still warm from the summer, and Viz has cleared up. Now on like windy days or rainy days, you will get stuff turned up and it's still a bit hazy, but for the most part, we're averaging 15 feet at minimum. So it's just chef's kiss, absolutely beautiful. How about in Florida? What's it like right now?
So Florida in the fall is not necessarily the best place to be diving. We just had, fortunately, the East Coast was spared most of this most recent hurricane, but the West Coast got hammered, up into Georgia and Tennessee got hammered. I mean, everyone's seeing those videos. And even for whatever reason, even if we don't get big hurricanes in the fall, it's generally very hit or miss for whatever reason. I suspect it's probably because the winter winds start to pick up in like end of September and then kind of just build through April almost. So from now until April, whether you're going to have good diving conditions is kind of a crapshoot, and it changes day to day. I think this past week has been okay, actually, which is surprising because the storm just passed. But I saw a video, I think today is October, 2nd, 3rd? There's a video from today of somebody in South Florida, and the water looks like glass, which is pretty remarkable. And by tomorrow, it could be 6-foot seas and gross chunky Viz. So it varies wildly, and if you can get in the water in the fall here, you can have some really amazing days. Or you can have some really bad days for from mid-September through mid-December, when there's not much to see and the Viz is awful. But so far, at least the East Coast has been there.
So what I'm hearing is if I want to dive Florida, come after April for better conditions.
If March is calm, I like March, April, May, and then early June. The problem with that is also when everybody else on Earth comes.
Oh, it's spring break party time.
Yeah, but at least Blue Heron Bridge, that's my favorite time to dive there. And then to dive offshore, I actually like mid-August to mid-September, because you have a lot of sharks around and you have the Goliath grouper aggregation. This year wasn't awesome for them. I think there was a lot of tagging done that spooked them into deeper waters.
Yeah, Blue Heron Bridge is such a bucket list for me.
The bridge, like I was saying, I've dived it probably 300 or 400 times at this point. So I get a bit jaded by it sometimes, and I'll guide people there, and we'll come up from a dive that I thought was kind of mediocre, and they'll be thrilled. And then I have to remind myself that, oh yeah, my bar for this place is so high because I've dived it so many times. Whereas, people traveling to come dive it aren't necessarily in that same boat. So if I take somebody on a dive and they see, 5 frogfish, 5 seahorses, and 2 batfish, that's a good dive, and they'd be stoked. But I've had dives there where I've seen 20 frogfish, 20 seahorses, 5 batfish, and a stargazer. And so that's where my bar is at this point for that site. And you can definitely, it's not uncommon at the right times of year to have those kind of dives.
Noted. I want to come diving with you because I want to see a stargazer, and I've never seen a batfish. Damn.
So the batfish are cool because they're one of those things that everybody who comes to the bridge asks to see batfish. And like the frogfish and seahorses are seasonal, so they come and go. They're really prevalent certain times of year, and then they're non-existent for 4 or 5 months. The batfish, you'll never see 20 of them on a dive, but they're around year round. So they're one of those cool things that no matter what time of year somebody comes to dive the bridge, if they're like, hey, I want to see a batfish, I'm like, all right, give it at least 2 or 3 dives. Usually you can find them on every dive, but 2 or 3 is a safe bet, and you'll get a batfish, at least one of the species. And then stargazers are very hit or miss. We've had weeks where we'll see 10 in 4 dives, and then you'll go 6 or 7 months without seeing one. And then all of a sudden you'll have like 4 in 2 dives, and then go another 4 months without seeing one. So I haven't really figured out their natural history yet, and I'm not sure anybody knows where they go or why they keep popping up randomly, because they aren't overly mobile, and when they're at the bridge, there's only so many places they can disappear to. So not really sure what the mystery is with them, and why they can be so prevalent and then non-existent, over the course of a week. But I've only seen one since probably early 2023. So they're haven't been around too much the last year and a half or so. And I know there's been a couple more than that actually found, but not like 2022, they were kind of all over the place for a couple months, and then they disappeared, and they've been here in like small bunches since then. But batfish guaranteed, stargazers not guaranteed, frogfish, seahorses guaranteed, dependence on time of year.
Oh, I want to dive it so bad. Also, you've already kind of gotten to the next segment, which is the critter roundup. So let's quickly do one for Seattle here.
What can you see?
So lots of life is happening. We just had a squid party in West Seattle, which is the most incredible thing you go down with a view of the Space Needle and the city. It's an urban area, and 30 feet, you have hundreds of squids mating and laying eggs. I'm actually going back today to check on the eggs to see if I can see the babies inside of them, because they take about 12 days before you start seeing the little nuggets in there, and about 20-ish days to hatch. So fingers crossed for that. We are also starting to see spiny lump suckers. Not a ton yet. Like the peak season in December, I found up to like 20 on a dive in about 20 feet of water too. It's literally a 2-hour dive on a steel 80. It's incredible how many you can find here in Seattle. Plus baby red octos and winged sea slugs, which I'm a fangirl of. Not everyone seems to know them. Okay, so you're laughing, but not everyone seems to appreciate winged sea slugs. I think they're the most incredible critters.
Are you talking about the lion's mane, the hooded nudibranch?
No, although right now we do have those too. I'm the ones that are about the size of a thumbnail that open and close their wings to fly up and down.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, to be honest, they're all right. They wouldn't be a sought after subject for me, I don't think.
Why are they just all right? No. That hurts my soul.
Okay, they're awesome. they're awesome. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, in my defense, they're really cool. The colors are amazing. The fact that they literally can open and close wings. And can you imagine a long exposure shot with one? How dramatic that could be.
That would be cool if you got one actively swimming, and like, because you see that shot with like Sweet Lips and things like that. But yeah, I can't recall ever seeing one with the long exposure with the motion trail behind it of a flappy nudibranch. I think that would be cool, actually.
Yeah, that's my goal. Although taking pictures of them, like in normal situations, is a lesson in patience and swearing. So getting a long exposure shot, I might literally smash my head against a rock. I don't know. It might literally kill me. We'll see. We're gonna go for it this winter, but I'm very nervous about how difficult it's going to be for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Also, we're not quite into harbor sale season, but it's getting close because in about a month, it's going to be night diving all the time because we're losing the sunlight and we're getting into the dark time of the year. I don't know how Florida is, but here it's night diving after 3 p.m. So
It doesn't get quite that dramatic here, but it's not, I like the winter, even though a lot of my favorite subjects aren't here, just because it's easier to do actual night dives because you don't have to wait till 9 p.m. for it to get dark. So once the winter rolls around, starts getting dark at 5:30 or 6. Way more days you can do night dives at the bridge because you're obviously it's tide dependent too. So you have to time it based on that, and the tides don't always allow for night diving, but it's much easier in the winter.
yeah, for sure. Okay, well, that was our roundup. Now let's get into the actual good stuff. Okay, the first question's a bit of a doozy. I hope you're ready. Okay, here we go.
Uh-oh.
What is the perfect ISO to guarantee an award-winning shot?
Well, so if I'm judging it, I'm going to say whatever the base ISO of your camera is because I despise noise in my pictures. It's arguably my least favorite aspect. Well, yeah. So if you can get a super clean file without noise, that appeals to me right out of the gate. So most of my favorite cameras that I've used are lower megapixels, generally because right out of the camera you have a much cleaner file. So there's something to be said for resolution, and obviously I do like having more resolution if I can get it. But my current camera right now is only 12 megapixels. My camera before that was only 12 megapixels. My camera before that was only 16. So I haven't owned a high resolution camera. I generally gravitate towards the lower resolution ones. And obviously like you can get a clean file out of every camera. The advantage of lower resolution cameras, in my opinion, is that you can shoot them at non-base ISOs and still get a really clean file. And I kind of this was a much longer answer to that question than was probably necessary, but that's how I feel about noise.
You just blew my mind. It was like I've always seen like the RAWs from my friends who shoot with like the full frame cameras with like 60 megapixels. I only have 20, and I'm always thinking, damn, it looks so much better. There's less backscatter. It looks like cleaner and sharper. And I'm thinking I have to save up for that. But you're saying no, you don't. And it's related to noise and ISO. Can you explain that a little bit?
So I'll speak with regards, although it applies to like micro four thirds and crop sensor cameras too, but for full frame especially, if you have lower resolution, you obviously have less pixels on the sensor. And I'm sure there's going to be some tech nerd who is going to correct some part of what I'm about to say, but this is my understanding of it. So you have less pixels on the sensor, but it's the same size sensor as if you have one that's cramming 61 on there. The advantage of having less pixels is each one of those pixels is bigger and it's able to gather more light. So the reason you get noise in your images is when the sensor is if you have to like crank your ISO, it's becoming, I can't remember if it's less or more sensitive to light, but whichever it is, the lower resolution camera can gather more light. You're not having that artificial noise creep in because you have big fat pixels. So obviously you can downsize a 60 megapixel file to to 12 megapixels, and then the noise is going to be less of an issue. But the point of having a 60 megapixel sensor is to take advantage of all that resolution. So if you're not doing that, there's not too much of a point in having a super high megapixel sensor. I am not a fan of post-processing. I'm not a fan of anything after actually taking the picture. I know it's necessary, so you have to process especially raw files, but the less work I have to do in post, the better. So the cameras I seem to gravitate towards, and it's a lot of it I think is just unconscious and based on the vibes of the files that come out of the camera. But a lot of the cameras I gravitate towards have cleaner files right out of the gate that require a lot less processing to get an end result. So the camera I shoot now is Sony A7S III, which is only 12 megapixels. There are for sure limitations to that with regards to stills, but it gets the job done. And then my favorite all-time camera is the Nikon Z4, which only had 16 megapixels, and it's one of the great tragedies, in my opinion, of camera technology is that sensor only got used one time in that camera and didn't get brought into the mirrorless world, because I think it was, in my opinion, it's the best DSLR sensor ever made. The image quality was amazing, and the files took almost no work if you got your exposure right to process them, and they were super, super clean. So I went on a tangent that wasn't really necessarily related to the question, but that's why I generally prefer the lower resolution cameras. It's better in low light, and for like topside wildlife photographers, I think it's an even bigger deal than underwater. But there are for sure instances, and like you mentioned hellbenders earlier. I was photographed them recently. Those creeks are super, super dark. So unless you're trying to shoot 1 second long exposures, you're gonna have to crank the ISO. And I was shooting up at like ISO 1000, ISO 1600, and on high resolution cameras, I would kind of balk at doing that. But on my A7S III, I didn't even think twice about it. And sure, there's still noise in there, but it's not really noticeable, and more importantly, it's not detrimental to the picture or the file.
That is fascinating. So when I first learned about underwater photography, I think both myself and others that I've talked to were always taught, keep your ISO at 100. But there are a lot of local divers here in Seattle, Pacific Northwest, where we have very dark conditions and backscatter, where the theory is keep your strobes as low as possible, turn your ISO up a little bit more, and turn your aperture and shutter speed, slow it down to let in more light and reduce backscatter. What is your opinion of this kind of train of thought? Because some people say, oh, you can take it up to 400, 500 ISO and still not get that noise. Do you agree with that?
So there's definitely something to that. So for example, I'll use the hellbenders again. So those creeks, while they look like they're clear, they're really not. There's a ton of crap just floating around in that water, just silt and forest debris and all that kind of stuff. And so and normally backscatter doesn't bother me. Every one of my pictures has backscatter. I almost never remove any unless it's egregious. The challenge in those kind of environments, and same thing in Seattle, a lot of the time when you don't get great viz, is to try to get the exposure right, freeze your subject and not have a ton of backscatter. So what I was doing for hellbenders is, again, raising the ISO, and then like your friends have said, lowering the strobe power a bit, And what that does is it's not necessarily eliminating backscatter because you're still putting out artificial light, but what it's doing is it's making it less apparent. So if you zoom in on any like an image from my Hellbender trip of a lot of strobe power and then zoom in on one with a little bit of strobe power, there's still the same amount of backscatter. It's just necessarily how noticeable it is and how offensive it is in the image is what that comes down to. Because strobe power isn't necessarily an indication of like all the backscatter. The backscatter is going to be lit up by whatever is being hit by artificial light that you're in like the field of view of your lens. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with strobe power other than how noticeable it is, right off the bat. So if you're trying to reduce the appearance of it, less strobe power can help with that, but it's not going to necessarily eliminate it.
And also, like you mentioned, when you raise your ISO, you're trading that for noise creeping in. Although looking at your Hellbender pictures right now, yeah, they're beautiful. I didn't notice any backscatter until you pointed it out. And I also think they're...
Yeah, so you have to look for it, but it's definitely there.
Okay, so what's the highest you'll raise your ISO before you're like, nope, I can't do this. Nope, I'm cringing.
So on this camera now, I've gone up to probably 30, I think, 3,200 is one of the stops. I've gone up that high. It doesn't make me happy to do that, but I will if there's no other option. And I know people will shoot, cameras up to 12,800 or, stuff like that. And if your exposure is right, then it's, the noise is there. You can still probably clean it up a little bit and it's not going to be, insanely detrimental. But if I was shooting cameras that are 36, 45, whatever now, I go over, probably like ISO 1000 or 1200 or whatever the stops are there. Just because sure you can eliminate it in post with, all the AI crap people are using now, but I'd prefer to not have to do that. I think the sweet spot still, in my opinion, for sensor performance is probably that 24 megapixel range. Because you get a decent amount of resolution and you still get pretty good low light capabilities especially with like the newer sensors. But I'm not really in too much of a rush to go to 50 or 60, but it seems that that's where all the cameras are going. So at some point, I'm not really going to have a choice.
Yeah, same here. So if I can summarize this to make sure I understand what you're saying here. So the problem with more megapixels is that the resolution is so good, you're going to pick up more and it won't quite perform as well in low light. Is that correct? Because you're fitting so many megapixels on the same size sensor as you would for like 24 megapixels.
Yeah. So I don't know why I can't keep this straight at the moment, but I believe it's the lower resolution sensors gather more light, and with fatter pixels, you don't have as much artificial noise creeping in as you do on the higher resolution sensors. So you can downsize those files, but then you're missing out on the whole point of the higher resolution cameras. So if you're going to be shooting the higher resolution cameras, I would try much harder than I do now to keep my ISO low to avoid noise creeping in. And whereas with the lower resolution ones, and this is specifically like it applies to micro four thirds and crop sensors as well, but this is much more specifically a full frame thing that I'm talking about, just because the extremes in resolution are so much greater than they are on the crop sensor or micro four thirds cameras currently.
Makes sense. But that's also a thing is crop sensors. I have a crop sensor camera. I have the Sony A6 V. And I've been told to my face that I will never win any underwater photography competition with a crop sensor. I have to go full frame. Does that sound right to you?
Not even remotely. So I would say the most successful camera I've had with regards to awards is the Nikon D500, which is 20 megapixel crop sensor camera. And then other than that, it's Nikon D700, which is full frame, but it's 17 years old at this point, and it's only 12 megapixels. But you can win awards with whatever camera you have. And people who are looking at those images, like judging it, they have no idea. Well, I mean, they might at some point know what camera it was photographed with, but when they're looking at the picture to judge it for competition, they're not looking at what camera it was shot with. And they're certainly not going to be able to guess that one was taken with an A6500 and one was taken with an A1 or something like that. It's going to be based on the photographic merit, not the camera model. And obviously there are advantages to certain camera models over others, but with regards to competitions or awarded images, I don't think that's the case at all.
Fair enough. Okay, I'm gonna take an awkward break and go back. It seems like more megapixel cameras, like with higher megapixels, are better for tropical environments almost, and maybe like fewer megapixels do better in low light settings, like here in the Pacific Northwest or in freshwater creeks where you have more of that like dark setting. Does that sound about right to you?
I think you could make that case. Like all else being equal, you could probably make that case because you have, if you're shooting in the Red Sea, you obviously have far more sunlight, and you're shooting, probably bigger scenes and things like that where you would want a lot of resolution and you don't necessarily have to put your ISO above, 400. Whereas in the Pacific Northwest, you might shoot a scene of, if you're up in Port Hardy, you can shoot like Seventry or Browning Wall with, a wide lens and it's a big scene, but it's still not like shooting one of the reefs in the Red Sea. And you're never going to have that amount of light. So, if you can still obviously shoot either spot with either type of camera in terms of resolution. But I think if I lived in the Pacific Northwest and that's where I did, 95% of my diving, I'd be more concerned about the low light performance of my camera body than I would be if I lived in like Bonaire or the Caymans or something like that. Just because the vast majority of the time you'll have way more light there than you will, and you're going to be, so you'll be able to shoot, different things that can benefit from a lot more light than you could in a place like the Pacific Northwest or most temperate water locations.
Tropical waters freak me out. Like clear, warm, witchcraft. I hate it. Oh, I hate being able to see. I hate beautiful tropical clear water. And I hate not shivering all the time. What is this witchcraft? Ugh.
Yeah, I would say I'm in the minority, especially people who live in a tropical place, but I greatly prefer cold water diving to warm water diving. Not because of the murkiness, but I generally just prefer cold water to warm water. I like the whole vibe a bit more. And obviously there's some pretty spectacular things in cold water. And I think part of the appeal is that less people do it, which is, if there's less people doing it, it makes it more interesting to me.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm a cold water girl at heart. Tropical is fun. I like it because you can see different things, but I'm at home here in Seattle. I'm at home in Canada, and it's where I love to dive. So yeah, we're talking about like, contests and judges. So, going off that line of, competitions and blah, 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 some photographers I know, professionals included, hate entering photo contests. They will not do it, while other professionals, love them. Which camp are you in? Love them or hate them?
I'm kind of in the middle. And so I definitely understand why, and I probably know some of those same people who despise the competitions that you're talking about and will not enter them. And I get that because, and this is why you see some really wacky pictures awarded in competitions, is because photography is a subjective medium, and there's, everybody has different opinions on what sort of picture will appeal. And there's obviously some images that are just so good that everybody who sees them is like, yeah, that's fantastic, and it warrants all of the merits it has received. But because photography is subjective, it can be a bit weird, I think, to judge it, because everybody's going to view every single picture a bit differently. I can understand why people don't want to enter it if it's a philosophical thing, like art is subjective, it shouldn't be judged, so I'm not going to do it. I totally understand that, and there are times when I feel that way myself. But on the other hand, I do think it's good. I think it's beneficial to enter competitions, A, because if you're successful, it can get your name out there, which can lead to all sorts of other things if that's your goal. But B, if you do have images that are successful in competitions, especially if you have an image that is successful in multiple competitions, then you kind of know that that intrinsically or extrinsically, I suppose, there's that picture. You've done something correct with that image, which I think is an ego boost for sure. But also it's nice that you created something that other people appreciate because they put value on it in whatever competition you put it in. So like, not to toot my own horn, I have a salmon image that was awarded in, I think, 4 or 5, like one salmon image that was awarded in 4 or 5 different competitions. And this is a picture that I had overlooked. I didn't enter in any competitions for 3 years. I didn't even process it for 3 years after I shot it. And one day I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I wonder if anybody else will feel the same. So I just put it in competitions before I posted or anything like that. And it started doing really well. And then it actually made me like the picture more than I had previously, which I think was a little surprising benefit of putting it in competitions. But I think a lot of it just comes down to what your goals are with regards to underwater shooting. If your goal is to get your name out there so that it can lead to different things and potentially you can have a career like that just revolves around underwater photography, then I think competitions are fantastic. And I know a lot of people who have that's how they've gotten their gig, for lack of a better term, is by having success in competitions, and then that leads to all sorts of other opportunities. Or if you're just curious about how other people feel about your photography, it's good to put it in front of unbiased people. Like, you can send a picture to your friend and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's great. But not every friend is going to be brutally honest or give you the type of feedback you're necessarily looking for. Whereas you can get that by entering competitions. If you enter the same picture in 5 competitions and they all kick it to the curb, maybe it tells you something about that image. Maybe it doesn't. But there's value, I think, in both winning and not winning. But if the benefits of winning don't interest you in any way, then I don't think it's worth your time or your money to enter pictures. The other advantage of competition, sorry, I know I'm rambling here, is that you can win really cool stuff. So, if you want to win cool gear, cool trips that you wouldn't be able to afford otherwise, then I think that's a really, that's a big benefit of a lot of these competitions, is especially the underwater ones. A lot of the dedicated underwater ones are giving out, trips that cost 10 grand. So if you win one, that's a trip you might never have been able to go on otherwise. I think that's arguably the biggest benefit for most shooters, is that you can potentially win some really, really cool opportunities that you might not get otherwise. I kind of waver back and forth between entering versus not. And I think, the more success you have, the more inclined you are to enter. But there are plenty of times where there's times where I've been awarded in competition and you're like, woohoo. And then it's like, yeah, okay. But it doesn't do much for you beyond that, other than like the quick ego boost. So I haven't decided if I'm like, there's a bunch of competitions that are either just opening or about to open through this year. And I haven't decided if I'm going to enter any. And part of that is because I don't think I've gotten too many worthwhile images this year, but also it's because I'm just not sure if I want to go through the whole process of paying for a bunch of competitions and then entering and then potentially winning one thing, but more likely, just getting kicked to the curb amongst thousands of other submissions. Competitions are a weird one for me, and I vacillate between whether I enjoy them or not all the time.
Yeah, that's totally encouraging for new photographers hearing that. I'm oscillating, even though I'm a winner. Be getting photographers as well that they don't want to enter because it's scary. It does cost money. So if you're like being on a budget, you're like, well, how can I afford this when I'm going up against these big names, and aren't they going to win anyways because they're established, their work is very familiar to probably a lot of people. Like, what hope do I have as a new photographer who's an unknown to break through when I don't have like the same money and tools and opportunities that these established photographers have? Like, how would you encourage someone who has these thoughts and maybe wants to try one day to enter a competition?
So because I think this is the advantage to photography being subjective, is you never know what's going to catch like a certain judge's eye in a certain competition. So the first image I ever had awarded was, I just tossed it in to I think it was Ocean Art, big underwater competition if people aren't familiar with it. I just tossed it into Ocean Art like last minute because it was the only underwater picture I had from all year. It was like, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. It cost $10 to enter this one picture. I'll toss it in. And then it ended up winning whatever the category was. I still look at that picture. I'm like, yeah, it's cool, but I don't know how great it is, but 5 judges had to agree that it was worth winning something. So I think you shouldn't be discouraged based on being a beginner or based on who else you think might be entering, because you never know what's going to catch a judge's eye. And it's inevitable that our own pictures, we either look at them too highly or because we attach emotions to it, or we look at them too negatively because they're ours. And we're like, yeah, it's not that good. But you have no idea how other people are going to feel about your pictures. So I say go for it. I wouldn't say, enter 10 images in 10 competitions, because chances are you're going to be throwing a lot of money away. But pick and choose a couple pictures that you like, or that you have had friends tell you are good, and toss those in a couple competitions and just see what happens. You never know what might get picked up. And it could lead to some really cool things. So I wouldn't say that you should be discouraged by other people entering or the fact that you're a beginner. Because you're always going to be, there's the Brian Scaries and Paul Nicklins of the world are always going to exist, and the vast majority of us are never going to be them. So you just got to take the chance, and hey, if you beat them, cool. A little feather in your cap that you went up against, some of the best underwater photographers of all time, and you got awarded. And that's pretty cool. So I think just go for it, and don't necessarily worry about the fact that you're a beginner or you don't have the latest, greatest gear. Because there's been plenty of incredible images shot with the most basic camera gear, and not necessarily the latest, greatest, most expensive.
That's good to hear. That's encouraging. I mean, it's more of a money thing. And I think I'm in the camp of, I hate everything I shoot. And I'm like, none of this shit is enter. None of this is good enough to bother. I'm wasting my money on shit that's not good.
So generally that's where I fall to. And then occasionally I'll have friends bully me into entering. And I actually got to return the favor last year. And this isn't, I won't say the image or the competition because it hasn't been public yet, but I bullied him into entering a picture that he wasn't going to enter because he thought there would be better versions of it. His ended up being awarded. And I remind him of that every once in a while, that But I think it's a good story. Like just enter stuff. You never know, and don't worry about what other people might enter. And for sure is probably some good strategies to entering these competitions. I have never ever had any success trying to figure out any sort of strategy. I just pick pictures that I think are decent, put them in the category I think they fit in, and then hope for the best. And I think that's all you can really do.
So just flip a coin, put my pictures in a row, like throw a dart. Ooh, okay, that one.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Or, one thing I think is really valuable is like pull 10 pictures that you're like, these ones are good. And then send them to people whose opinions you trust, who are going to give you honest feedback, even if it's harsh. Because then you'll know which ones are legitimately worth potentially entering, or which ones you're like, hey, try this again if you get this opportunity again, and it'll be a bit better. And I'll speak for myself. Most of the images that I've had awarded are not like exotic locations or unusual subject matter. It's stuff that helps obviously, but it's stuff that I've seen a lot and photographed a lot, and you end up getting, you still get unusual images the more time you spend with a specific subject. So I also don't think, I've heard this argument a lot, that people who are, especially in the US, like, well, I'm stuck in Florida, or I'm stuck in Washington, like I don't get to travel and go see all the cool things. Like that doesn't necessarily matter so much, because, and I'm assuming we're going to talk about Alex at some point here, but one of my favorite things that Alex ever said was, something that's exotic in one location, or something that's common in one location, is exotic somewhere else. So if you have something like, you guys get the lumpies up there,
Yeah.
Good luck seeing a lumpy pretty much anywhere else in the world. So for the people who aren't in Seattle, lumpies are exotic creatures. For most competition judges, lumpies are exotic creatures. So I think it's a matter of perspective with regards to that. So I don't think that should be a limiting factor either. And in my opinion, especially for underwater competitions, I think people in temperate water locations generally have an advantage, because you're photographing things that are way less photographed than the tropical destinations. Like everyone and their mother has been to Lembe or the Philippines and photographed the hairy frogfish. But, the vast majority of divers have not photographed a war bonnet or a grunt sculpin or things like that. So I think temperate water places, especially places like Seattle, might actually have an advantage with regards to underwater competitions, because you're potentially entering things that are way less commonly seen and photographed. So then you don't necessarily have to have the craziest picture of whatever the subject is, because even a quality picture is going to stand out just because you're shooting something that isn't necessarily seen all the time. So I know that was I got off topic there, but.
No, this is all great information. Although I did think, I was just sitting here going, oh, war bonnets. Who among us here has not seen a certain war bonnet yet, despite looking?
I know. Eventually I will get one at some point. But I'm going to be picky right out of the gate. I don't want a little juvenile. I want one of those big, duck-lipped, huge crested adults. That's what I'm really after.
Okay, yeah, we got to go to Cove 2. I know of a piling there, and I find 90% of my time when I'm there. And they range. Sometimes I see one, that's a small one. Sometimes I've seen 11 at one time on one piling. And there were some chunky boys. That and Mukilteo. Mukilteos are chunkier. They're also a lot shyer in my experience. But come visit. We'll try both sides multiple times. We'll find you some cool stuff. It's going to be great. So you brought up Alex Mustard. Right. Yeah, Alex Mustard. Everyone knows the name Alex Mustard. And you were actually a co-host with him on the Underwater Photography Show. Can you talk about the show a little bit? Because I've seen it. It's epic.
Well, thank you. So I will say the attention I've gotten from it, maybe foolishly was not expecting. And a lot of it has kind of made me a bit uncomfortable because I wasn't prepared for it. When I have like, it's flattering because I'll have like complete strangers shoot me messages like, hey, this is really cool, blah, 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 blah. But also I'm pretty introverted. So it takes a while for me to get used to that. But yeah, so Alex, I've spoken to him like very briefly over the years, like an email exchange here and there, a Facebook Messenger exchange here and there, but never anything like serious. And then last year around DEMA time, he shot me a message. He's like, hey, I have this idea for a YouTube show. Would you be interested in co-hosting it with me? And it was completely out of the blue. It was really random. And I said, first thing I said was yes, because I'm not going to, it seemed like a really cool opportunity. It would give me the advantage to, selfishly, I get to talk to Alex and pick his brain all the time. But he could choose literally whoever he wanted. And so I was curious as to why he had asked me. And he gave me an interesting answer, which was that because he and I had no prior relationship and have never really spoken or talked about underwater photography, that I would come at things from a different perspective than he would necessarily, and that's what he was looking for, which I thought was really interesting and actually kind of flattering in a weird way. But we weren't sure it was actually going to work. We've never spoken before. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to, have conversations on camera, if the dynamic was going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
But it did, and we're on a little bit of a hiatus right now because Alex was traveling for a few weeks, and then he just moved into a new house and is trying to get all sorted. So I promise who's ever listening to this, it is coming back. We have a bunch of topics ready to go. We just haven't recorded them yet. But yeah, it's been really cool. I've learned a lot just from talking with him, because obviously he's a font of knowledge with regards to underwater photography. And it's just been fun. Like it's not a huge thing. Like we don't have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but we seem to have like a small dedicated following, which is kind of what we set out to have from the beginning. And it's slowly growing, which is obviously what you want. But we've covered a lot of cool stuff, and I think people seem to enjoy it. We've gotten mostly positive feedback. We've had a couple random people who just seem to have it out to give us a hard time about various things, which is, that's the nature of social media, I guess. But for the most part, it's been all positive feedback, and, kind of building a little community around the show, which is cool.
That's so helpful. And also, as knowing you're an introvert, I do want to personally thank you because I have reached out to him and been like, oh, I love your stuff. Can I ask you questions and stuff? And you've been so kind, just helping and giving your knowledge away, which has just been like, oh my God, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, yeah. So it's if people ask me about, especially underwater photography, because that's one of the things I sort of know about, I'll go forever on that. But yeah, I'm happy to help however I can. And there were plenty of times when I had just started getting serious in underwater photography, where it would mean a lot if I reached out to somebody and they actually responded to me, like that meant a lot. And it, for sure helps. And I think that the goal for all of us is just to take better pictures underwater and potentially then allow the greater population to see cool stuff. And then maybe we can all start, giving a shit about it and, protecting it. And even if it's one or two people that we can impact, that's one or two people that we can impact. And I think that's beneficial. And I know, like, I'll speak a little bit here for Alex. Like, I know that's one of his goals too, is he wants as many people as possible making as many pretty pictures underwater as possible. And I echo that sentiment. So however I can help with that is something I enjoy doing. So I'm happy to help and answer whatever questions people have. I know I sometimes will read something and then completely forget to answer it for a month. But I promise that whoever's listening to this, I've done that to you. It's not intentional. I just have a goldfish memory, and at some point I will respond.
That's amazing. So, can you tell us a bit about your handle? It's so unusual, the formerly homeless photographer. What's the story behind that?
So I'm prepared to answer this for every podcast at some point. Usually it's the first thing people ask. So I was surprised. I was surprised it took this long, but I moved out to LA, probably I think 2017 for a job. And for those who have not lived in LA, it's very expensive. So I moved out there, and I for the first month I lived there, I had a room in a big house, and it was $2,000 a month.
Oh,
And I was not getting paid enough to be able to afford to pay $2,000 a month and feed myself and do literally anything else. So after that first month was up, it was either live in some really, really sketchy areas and pay, $1,200, $1,500 a month for, a dump, but then, have a little bit of money, or it was to live out of my car and be able to actually go to afford do fun things. So like I went to Alaska, I went to God's Pocket. For sure would not have been able to afford to do those things if I had been living in an apartment or a house. So it for sure sucked a lot of the time because LA, especially in the summer, the low at night is 90 degrees. So there'd be some days where I'd buy a hotel room for the night and enjoy some air conditioning and an actual bed. And it's not an experience I would want to have again or want to go through again, but the experiences I was able to have because I chose to live out of my car are still potentially I wouldn't have been able to go do. So I don't regret it. And like I said, it allowed me to go travel a couple cool places. But I was homeless in California, well, homeless adjacent, if we're going to call it a Nissan Rogue a house. Homeless adjacent for 2 years in LA before moving back to the East Coast.
damn. I was going to say, those who haven't lived in LA, lucky you.
Yeah, well, yeah, that too. There's not much that I miss. I miss the food, but that's about all that I miss from living in LA.
Oh, yeah, the food is great. I have family there, but yeah, I don't like it. And I know you're surprised it took us long to get there, but you were spouting some amazing knowledge about ISOs and full frames and megapixels. So you know what? I got distracted. You're not the only one with a goldfish brain, although I prefer to think I have a gerbil brain. I'm gerbil and you're goldfish.
A what brain?
A gerbil brain. I have a gerbil brain.
Oh, gerbil brain.
And mostly I'm
Fair
like,
enough.
sniff, sniff. Is there food? Sniff, sniff, sniff. Huh. I want to be a comfy potato now.
Yeah.
I know. Okay. I have a couple questions to end this interview. Do you predict any trends in photography coming up for 2025? I feel like Snoot was like huge for a long time, that beautiful black background. And this year I'm seeing more long exposure work. Going into next year, what do you think is going to be like the hot new thing to do?
Dang, that's an interesting question that I've never, I don't think, thought about. So yeah, the Snoot thing was, and I think Snoots are a useful tool, so I don't think that style is going to go away. Same with slow shutter. One thing that I honestly hope goes away is and I'll actually answer your question here at some point, but one thing I hope goes away is this whole like fad with artificial backgrounds. I dislike that immensely. And I know a lot of that's taste, but like it's I don't like introducing artificial stuff other than the flash that we need to use. I don't like introducing artificial things into images. So all these pictures of macro subjects with pink and purple and yellow and glowy backgrounds, like it doesn't appeal to me at all. And that is something that I think I've seen a ton this year that I'm hoping will fade out because selfishly I'm tired of seeing it. I sound old and curmudgeon-y right now, but that's just how I feel about that kind of thing. But what I think might catch on, I think the slow shutter thing is going to continue building because I think it's still kind of a niche style of image, and I think that there's still a lot of potential for really, really cool pictures with slow shutter and people are doing all sorts of different things with it. I don't know what might, I think, you know what I think it's going to be? I think it's going to be remote lighting and off-camera lighting. So obviously that's been around for a long time, but I think with things like the anglerfish triggers and backscatter having their mini flash and now their hybrid flash, which does the remote strobe, I think it's going to be a lot more accessible and a lot more straightforward for people to do. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a lot more remote lighting images popping up the rest of this year and into 2025, just because it'll be easier to do and more affordable to do, because a lot of those flashes that do it aren't necessarily the bank breakers that like some of those big, huge video lights that you used to do for remote lighting cost. So I think probably remote lighting will be the next trendy image style that we'll see popping up. And I think that will be much more lasting than a lot of these other kinds of pictures, like the artificial background thing. Like I think that's going to fade out. So I think a lot of people are going to get tired of it. But there's so much you could do with remote lighting or off-camera lighting that I think we'll start seeing a lot more of, and it'll be a lot longer lasting. Kind of how snoots have been. Snoots are still popular, even though they've been around for 10, 12 years now. I think remote lighting will have a similar lasting impact.
So I was going to ask about what you think is overrated, and I guessed you would say snoots, but nope, I was wrong.
I think the snoot spotlight effect is something that I think is a bit overdone and overrated, but there's a lot more you can do with snoots than just the spotlight. And shameless plug here for the Underwater Photography Show, we do have a whole episode on snoots, and both Alex and I give some like techniques or tips on images you can make with snoots that aren't reliant on that spotlight look. And there's a lot of images that I think people probably think are shot with snoots that aren't. If you just strobe angles or even just like reduction rings, things like that, you can do a lot of cool things with those. And snoots themselves, Alex dislikes them more than I do. I think snoots are cool and I like them for a lot of things. But yeah, the artificial background thing is definitely what grinds my gears more than anything else, I think.
Yeah, I'm also curmudgeon-y. You damn underwater photographers with your glitter sponges behind your photographs. Get off my lawn. Get off my lawn, kids.
Yeah. I just think it looks too unnatural, and I like a more natural looking picture.
I'm in that camp too.
That.
Yeah, I've also seen a lot of like quote unquote like long exposure style where there's a very long drag, and I've actually shown a few to you where I'm like, this is beautiful, but it looks very edited.
Yeah.
Like at what
the other
point...
thing too.
Pardon?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no,
I was going to say the other thing too is with Photoshop skills becoming what they are, I think it's this is one thing where I think competitions are useful, is because raw files are required for the vast majority of competitions. If your picture is going to win, that it's going to cut out a lot of that potential, or like artificial AI over photoshopping that I think is kind of prevalent with regards to a lot of wildlife photography, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's also some merit because of that now, and I know we're getting back to competition now, but I think because of that, having pictures awarded in competitions that require raw files is a little bit of a, it gives you a little bit of cachet, because like, oh, they actually achieved this photograph largely, in camera, because obviously you have to process raw files. Every raw file has to be processed, because it's just flat and dull if you don't. But you largely achieved this because of your photographic skill, not because of something you did in Photoshop or whatever else, AI or whatever else afterward. So I think that's an area where competitions are actually going to start being more useful than they've been in the past, for lending credibility to people as skilled photographers, and not just as skilled post processors or Photoshoppers or AI wizards.
Yeah, I think the AI question is almost a bit boring for that reason, because yeah, AI can make a fish look pretty realistic, but you can't really replace the human ingenuity behind it. You can't replace just the cool things that people can do when they're working with technology and they've mastered craft in their camera. And there are ways to check that I think is never going to go away. And I am annoyed because I want AI to do my dishes and my laundry so I can do more art instead of do my dishes and pay my bill so I have more time to go diving and shoot my camera. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I'm with you, because I used it. I've been using it to do some stuff online like the last couple of weeks, and I'm like, holy shit, this is wildly easier than doing this all myself. But then you're like, yeah, but it's also wildly easier to do a whole lot of things with it that aren't necessarily good. So it gives me hope that other people are like what you just said, that there's always going to be ways to check the authenticity of a photographer's skill. And there's only so, if you understand light and things like that, it's something AI probably is a long way away from understanding in the same way. So I think there is still some hope that photographic skill with a camera is going to count for something for a while longer.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. Lumpies are the coolest fish in the sea, and that's all I've got to say about that.
I love it. One of my goals for the winter, if it's okay for me to share, apparently male lumpsuckers have this fluorescent glow to them, the males. So I have some fluorescent gear. I'm going to try and capture a picture this winter. So wish me luck. I am so excited.
Oh, no shit. I didn't know that. That would be cool.
That would be so cool. I have no idea if it's actually going to work or not, so don't get too excited, but that's my goal for the winter.
Well, fortunately, you should have plenty of chances since they're everywhere.
Everywhere. Oh my God. They're everywhere in the winter, and come spring, I can find like 30 baby lumpsuckers the size of a grain of rice at certain dive sites. I'll just be on one little piece of kelp and I'll see like 3 in a row.
Yeah, that's cool. So you should have plenty of chances. I think you'll be able to get it done.
Well, we'll see if I can master the technique in time. I'm still working on techniques too. Yeah. And also, is it okay if on a personal note, I ask you what can I do for myself for my photography? Because I'm still new and I'm always learning, and you are pretty mastered in your craft. Any advice for me?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I don't know that I would agree with you. But I mean, I think the biggest thing is, so one thing this is probably going to be a longer answer than you're expecting, but one thing that I think people do, I think it's more on like when they travel places than when they're local, which I understand. But I would say try to focus on one specific thing with regards to your pictures each time you go diving, and don't try to photograph everything in every style, on every dive. I think one of the things that's really helped me is I'm gonna go shoot this type of picture on this dive, and only that. And then you start to get more proficient with like that type of image, and then you can move on to another technique or another style or learn another lens. And then, slowly over time, you start to be able to do, several of those on a dive. But I think too many people go in the water and they end up just photographing everything and trying to shoot every different type of picture on the same dive. And then they come back with a lot of images. Whereas, and for me, that's, if you're looking to create compelling pictures, I don't think that's the way to do it. And unless you're at a level like Alex can go on every dive and shoot a million different styles and come back with a million different pictures, but he also dives, 700 times a year. I think that going and focusing on one type of image or one type of subject and then shooting that subject in a couple different ways is going to be much more beneficial for learning, certain skills and certain techniques and certain gear that will, and maybe you'll only come back with like one picture from a dive, but that picture might be awesome because you really spent time focusing on one specific thing. And then over time, that'll snowball, and then you'll be able to come back with 5 great pictures in 2 or 3 different styles and 10 or something like that. So generally and I'll still do it, is I generally go into the water, especially here locally, with one specific type of picture in mind. And of course, it's wildlife, so you never know what you're going to get. And, the best laid plans often go sideways. But whenever I bring people to the Blue Heron, for example, and they want to do a workshop, I tell them before they show up that day, I'm like, pick 1 or 2 things that you would like to work on, and we're only going to do that. Because I think it's much easier to learn 1 or 2 things at a time, become proficient in those, and then move on to the next thing. And then eventually become proficient in everything, and then you can do multiple things on a dive. But I think something I see is people try to do everything with every subject, and they don't come back with pictures they're happy with. Whereas I think if you just take each dive, focus on one specific thing, and you might only come back from that dive with one kick-ass picture, but that picture kicks ass. And to me, that's more valuable than 10 or 20 images. So I think, and I know this was kind of rambly, but if you can focus on one, like I know you've been working on the that slow shutter thing.
Yeah.
That it's obviously harder to give advice on specific things like over texting without being in person, but I would say keep working on that, and don't worry about trying to shoot a black background on the same dive and a bigger scene on that dive. Like just focus on, find a subject that preferably one that doesn't move. And that's the best advice I can give for learning any technique, is find something that doesn't really move. And then just hammer that technique until you get it. Because once you get it, then you'll figure it out. You'll know it every time. So I just, perhaps I've gotten too rambly here, but I think you just got to focus on one thing every time you go in the water and not try to do everything. And then, eventually it'll all click and you'll be able to get whatever picture you want in whatever scenario you want. And I'm still not at that point, frankly. I still will I'll still catch myself sometimes trying to shoot too many things in too many different styles on a dive. And inevitably those are the dives where I come back with a bunch of pictures that I don't really care for. Whereas if I go in focused, I usually am able to come out with an image that I'm happy with, or at least reasonably happy with, because I focus on one specific thing instead of trying to multitask while underwater.
I love that. Well, tonight's going to be long exposure for me. Then it's going to be a long exposure, which is one of the only times I still use my snoot these days is for long exposure. Small beam of light. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Here's one other thing. Sorry,
Yeah.
one real quick. It just came to me. So you guys have a lot of the plumose anemones in up there. I think they'd be a really good subject to try because you don't need to snoot them. So what you could do is isolate one against something that's a bit further away, or even the open water, and then you don't necessarily have to have your snoot. You can just do, like, as long as your strobes are lighting just the plumose, you'd have to have a real long shutter speed probably to get some ambient light in there in that water. And then just do like some camera drag or camera movement yourself as the exposure goes off. It might be easier to do that than trying to snoot something super small with that CNC snoot, because I know that beam is not especially narrow.
So annoying. It's so annoying.
Yeah. So the other thing, if you're going to do like, here's one thing, and I know maybe people listening don't care, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you're shooting like subjects where you're moving the camera to get the movement, I would set your camera to front curtain sync, because then the flash will fire at the start of the exposure, so your composition will be how you want it, and then the motion will be all around it. If you're shooting something and the subject is moving, that's when I like to use rear curtain sync, and the flash will fire at the end of the exposure, and you'll get whatever motion behind the subject. So it looks more natural. Whereas if you have, you do front curtain sync and the subject is moving, then you're going to have, like, for example, a shark, then you're going to have ghost shark in front of the shark that you lit with your strobes, which looks super goofy and unnatural and unpleasant. So if you're moving the camera, I would say front curtain sync. The subject is moving, I would use, and you're not moving, then I would use rear curtain sync.
And I don't need a snoot, you say. I can just put my strobes on like a very low light, like a very low flash, and then a very slow aperture, and then just go for it. I don't have to use a snoot.
You don't have to use a snoot. So like the whatever the flash lights up, that will freeze. Everything else is going to have the motion. So you don't need the snoot. If you can, so like it's probably easier with a plumose that's like standing upright, isolated away from something, because then you're not going to have to worry about light or the strobe light bleeding on to anything else. And then also like angle the strobes inward a little bit so that you're not blasting light into the background, and then you can isolate that subject much more easily. And potentially get some motion blur. I suspect up there, unless you have real sunny days coming up, that you're going to have to use quite long exposures to get real motion blur, or you're going to have to introduce some like camera movement yourself to get a real motion-y effect, just because of how dark it is.
Yeah, it's getting dark. I'll probably end up taking like a light and like putting it off to the side or putting it behind the subject to try and get some ambient light in there to play with, but we'll play around with it. We'll see what happens.
So the backlighting can have really cool effects with slow shutter, especially with like a video light or something in the background, because every little movement will show up with a little bit of motion blur. And then obviously your strobe freezes whatever is in the foreground. But that can have really cool effects and is often a relatively easy way to get motion blur in dark water. That would be a bit harder otherwise.
So much fun stuff to play with. Thank you for all your help, and wish me luck tonight. I'm excited. I can't wait to put on my scuba gear and go diving now. Like, I'm itching to go diving.
Where are you gonna go tonight?
Junkyard. I was gonna check to see if the squid eggs had any babies in them, see if
Oh,
they're
you said
developing
that.
yet.
That's right. Yeah.
But Junkyard
Yeah.
has so much cool stuff. There's for like long exposure. There's tons of nudibranchs there, tons of cool like plumose anemones and still subjects. So I'm maybe even a winged sea slug, which if I see one, I can long exposure that. I'm going for it. If I can see it, that's my goal this winter. It's one of my goals is long exposure winged sea slug, even though I know you hate them apparently.
I don't hate them. They're just they don't get me jazzed, for lack of a better term. To be fair, most nudibranchs don't. I'm not a nudibranch guy. It takes a real like the melobes. I'm all about the melobes. Other than that, though, most nudibranchs don't get me too excited.
Broke my heart. You broke my heart.
I will say I'll give the Pacific Northwest. You guys have way cooler nudibranchs than we have in Florida. I think probably one of the reasons I don't necessarily care about them is that most of the ones we have here are super small to the point where like they're hard to see. And I don't know, you guys just have the big chunky guys out there that are more interesting.
Pacific Northwest, #1 in chunky nudibranchs. USA, USA, USA.